Coming in at number 10 is Skindred, the greatest raga metal band of all time, in my opinion. I don't even know if there are any others, but if there are, none of them will come close to these guys. These guys invented raga metal, and their frontman, Benji Webe, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, he's awesome. His vocals are amazing, he's wild on stage, and even on his Instagram, he's hilarious. And they've played around with, reggae, punk rock, ska rock, I think that's what it's called, drum and bass, dubstep, electronica, and they didn't sell out, don't worry about that. They found the perfect balance between electronic music and heavy metal on about 1 or 2 of their albums, and it sounded good, and I cannot wait to hear what they have next. They are so much fun. Believe it or not, these are the guys who recorded a song that was on the Need for Speed Underground 2 soundtrack, Nobody. Look it up if you've forgotten about that song. Coming in at number 9 is Megadeth. Yes, I am one of those people who will argue that Megadeth is better than Metallica, and here's why. Just like Metallica, they aren't afraid to experiment, but even when they experiment, for the most part, they stick to their thrash metal roots in some capacity. And even the experimentation that they did in some of their work is more entertaining than what Metallica have put out post the Black Album. That's just my opinion. Yes, Megadeth have done the infamous Risk album, which, was a literal risk for them, because after their first 4 albums being thrash metal albums, Dave Mustaine, the frontman and lead singer, wanted to chase the success of Metallica's Black Album. Considering Dave Mustaine actually started out in Metallica, it kind of makes sense. So they did that for 4 albums. By that point they had 8 albums in total, and the 8th album was Risk, and that is considered by many to be somewhat of a black sheep among their discography. Unless you count Super Collider, one of their more recent efforts, or some people call it Pooper Collider. But all in all, they're a little bit more consistent than Metallica, and they actually have 15 albums under their belts, with a 16th album coming out this year. I love what these guys have to offer, and even though Dave Mustaine's vocals aren't what they used to be, they're still great. With their 15th album, Dystopia, marking a comeback for the band, I'm sure it'll only get better from here. Coming in at number 8 is the true metal gods, Black Sabbath. This is a band that has been through a lot. They started out in the late 60s and then they disbanded in 2017, but they went off on a high note. They've had multiple singers like Ozzy Osbourne, Ronnie James Dio, 2 Deep Purple vocalists, Ian Gillan and Glenn Hughes, and even Tony Martin for a couple of albums. And the results have been somewhat of a mixed bag, depending on who you ask. But for me personally, I've enjoyed most of their albums. They've made a few mistakes along the way, but that's how all bands are. No band is perfect. These guys pioneered traditional heavy metal, stoner metal, doom metal, sludge, grunge, and all that kind of stuff. So they're a very, very, very important band. They aren't afraid to experiment every once in a while and shift away from the heavier elements, but it's not going to be for everybody. But that's the interesting thing. There's a wealth of content, about 19 albums to be exact, and they all have something unique to offer, so this is a band I highly recommend, though there are some that I do prefer over them. Coming in at number 7 is Slayer. This is one of my all-time favorite thrash metal bands. They are fast, heavy, and they don't believe in restraining themselves. They will sing about literally anything, from Satanism to the evil among society, hypocrisy, torture, human experimentation, Nazism, literally anything. And it might be a little too much for some people, but in a way they were kind of wallowing in parody, which is interesting. So if you can, put aside the heavy themes and lyrics and stuff like that, You'll have a good time because their sound is amazing. It took a while to get there because their first album was a very basic, raw thrash metal album, Show No Mercy. But everything after that, especially Hell Awaits and Rain and Blood, those are the albums that define them. They did experiment with alternative metal and new metal in the form of Diabolus and Musica and God Hates Us All. But even those albums are awesome. I think they're very, very underrated. Now the band is unfortunately no longer together. They disbanded in 2019, but thankfully they decided to give their career a satisfying close before the pandemic started, so we should be grateful they disbanded when they did. And besides, they've been at it for nearly 40 years, almost 4 decades. Let's give them a rest, shall we? So coming in at number 6 is Venom. This is the band that pioneered extreme metal. They practically invented thrash metal with their first album, Welcome to Hell, which was at the time, a cross between heavy metal and speed metal because it was fast and heavy, which was unheard of at the time. And this in itself had an impact on the foundation of death metal and black metal in a way. And even their second album, Black Metal, expanded on that. Later on, they felt threatened by bands like Metallica and Megadeth because of how successful they were. So, in a way, they tried to draw in a much wider audience by, changing their sound up a bit and making it more mainstream, which didn't appeal to me. I preferred the heaviness of their first 2 albums. But eventually, by the late 90s, they began to recapture that, and pretty much everything they've put out ever since has been fantastic. These guys are a very underrated and very important band when it comes to extreme metal, and they're still active today, with 15 albums under their belt. Let's see what they do next. Coming in at number 5 is Firespawn. Now, there isn't much to say about this band because they've only done 3 albums. These guys are basically, I think some of them are former members of Entombed, which is a band I know I should have listened to by now, but I'll get to them. Entombed is a legendary Swedish death metal band, and, the lead singer from that band is now the frontman of this particular band, and according to him, they wanted to play death metal that was faster and louder than anything they've ever done before. And I think they've done that. The 3 albums they've put out are mind-blowing. They're some of the best death metal I've ever heard. And I cannot wait to see what they do next. They really stand out to me among most death metal bands. It's just something, especially their second album, The Reprobate, it's just something you have to listen to before you die. If you want to get into death metal, well, there you go. You can just try out that album, or everything they've done, pretty much. And even Entombed. You can look at Entombed and see what they've done if you want to get into death metal. So, yeah, these guys are amazing. So coming in at number 4 is going to be Cannibal Corpse. This was my first death metal band ever, and I'm grateful for it. This was the beginning of my journey into the world of extreme metal, regardless of what the subgenre was. They started out with Chris Barnes as the frontman, and they did 4 albums together. They were all great, but I feel like they got better as they went on. Even after Chris Barnes left the band and was replaced by George Fisher, aka Corpse Grinder. His vocals are louder, more ferocious, and the band's production on their albums have gotten much better, much more sophisticated, heavier. But the old stuff is still good to listen to, even though it's very raw by today's standards. They've got a new album coming out in April. I'm not going to show you the cover because that's a little bit hectic, but yeah, I can't wait for that. That's going to be exciting. If you want to get into death metal, put this in your starter pack. These guys are awesome. Coming in at number 3, and this is going to be a weird pick because I put these guys above Cannibal Corpse. 6 Feet Under. Okay, don't hate me. Don't hate me. I can explain. So I was interested to see what this particular band was all about after listening to everything that Cannibal Corpse had done. What I got was a more groove-oriented death metal band, and I love it when death metal is groovy, or I think I just love groove metal better because I guess it's because groove metal is pretty fast, and I like metal when it's fast. Chris Barnes, his vocals are great for most of the albums, except for the most recent one, Nightmares of the Decomposed. That's where it feels like they're absolutely shut up. Aside from just, death metal and groove metal, they experiment with their sound from time to time. I mean, True Carnage had some elements of new metal, and Death Rituals had some ambient elements in it. That was probably their most experimental album to date, and I think the longest one as well. But, I enjoy pretty much everything they've done. They're not a perfect band, and they get way more hate than they deserve, but still, I don't know, I ended up becoming more addicted to them than I did Cannibal Corpse for some reason. So yeah, that's why they're quite high on this list. Oh, and they've done 4 cover albums. The Graveyard Classic series. A lot of people hate those albums. I love them. I don't care what anybody says. Okay, so for my top 2, these 2 bands that I have are interchangeable. They can vary from time to time, so my number 2 might become my number 1 weeks from now, and vice versa. So, my number 2 is Behemoth. These guys are, honestly, the kings of black metal. I mean, they started out doing traditional black metal, but then they transitioned into blackened death metal. And they are constantly testing the limits of the genre, as well as metal in general, seeing how far they can go, to the point where it's become somewhat otherworldly on their most recent album, I Loved You at Your Darkest. And Nagal, the frontman and lead singer, he is just a phenomenal singer. He even has a country band called Me and That Man as a side project, which is basically country music when he's not focusing on Behemoth. And, the corpse paints and the costumes and all that type of stuff is awesome. And, they're not afraid to get caught up in controversy. But that's who they are, and it works for them. They're one of the most ambitious bands of all time, and I can only wonder how long it'll be before they put out another album. But yeah, they're amazing. So my number 1 pick, you're probably wondering what it is. It's a band that started out in one place, transitioned to another, and is one of the most diverse bands ever. This band is Opeth. Most people know this band for its early days of progressive death metal and just progressive metal in general. The band's singer, Michael Ackerfeld, started out doing death metal vocals and growling, and now his vocals are flat out clean. He does more singing because the band transitioned on their 10th album to progressive rock. This transition wasn't for everybody, but the fans that stuck around, they were definitely rewarded. I mean, even their progressive rock stuff is pretty cool. And yes, this is another band from Sweden. Sweden's just full of talent, isn't it? This is also a band that I could fall asleep to. Not in a bad way. I mean, I could listen to them all night, and by the time I wake up, maybe, I don't know, around midnight or something like that, I'll realize, wow, I just listened to a whole Opeth album and I fell asleep. That's a good thing. And then I fall back to sleep again. But yeah, they are one of the most unforgettable bands ever. I love what they do. I love how diverse they are. They have 13 albums to choose from if you're interested, and you're gonna enjoy their stuff, I promise you. So yeah, that was my top 20 metal bands of all time. That will probably change over the next few years, so yeah, just remember that. Next time, I'm gonna be discussing my top 10 favorite metal genres. I've spoken all about the genres I like, but I haven't taken my top 10 and ranked them from my least favorite to my absolute favorite. So look forward to that sometime next week, and yeah, thank you all for watching. Please be sure to like the video, share and subscribe, and hit the notification icon. Be safe during this time, and I'll see you soon.